Hi guys, welcome and who dat? I'm Joe, and this week who dat is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Bucs come into the Caesar Superdome and defeat the Saints 20-10, and it was a defensive struggle for the first three quarters, and then everything just fell apart in the fourth quarter. The big reason the Saints lost, of course, are the five turnovers. Unbelievable progression of events in the fourth quarter, and a game that it seemed the Saints defense had completely in control just went off the rails. The turnovers led to short fields for the Bucs, and they were able to capitalize. The Saints, we had a bunch of issues. There's a lot of things I want to complain about. The first thing I'll do is bring up the stats on the offense. Jameis Winston was 25 of 40 for 236 yards with one touchdown and three interceptions. Winston has only thrown three interceptions in the 8 games he started as a Saint prior to this game. So this was the first game where he was a turnover machine, and there was no need for it to happen. I will get back into my complaints about this game toward the end of this video with some hot takes. But on the rushing in for the Saints, we looked pretty good. Ingram had 10 carries for 60 yards. I think running straight at this Tampa Bay team is the way to go. They have fast linebackers, they have an aggressive defensive line. We didn't have Kamara. Ingram's not going to take the edge with speed. We seem to have a lot of success running the ball when we ran the ball. The issue was there were a couple of runs that didn't work, and I think it was more of a play calling thing than it was a production thing from the players. So as you can see, Ingram averaged 6 yards a carry. Now he fumbled again, and he fumbled last week. And if Ingram's going to keep fumbling, I don't know if 6 yards a carry is going to matter. Dwayne Washington had 4 carries for 18 yards. Taysom Hill had 3 carries for 14 yards. The first carry Taysom had, he was at quarterback. He pretended to throw a quick pass, and then he ran to the center, left center. We do power right. That was a good play. He gained a lot of yards on that one. The second one with the receiver in motion, he faked to the receiver, and then he dropped back as if he was going to set up the pass. Then he decided to run to the right. And by then there were 3 Buccaneers waiting for him, because that's basically all we do from that formation is run to the right. He ended up with 14 yards. That was an instance where I don't know if it was an option for Taysom to hand the ball on the receiver crossing or keep it himself, and he made the wrong decision and kept it himself, because if he would have handed it off, it would have been a big gain. We saw that a lot when Hill first was tried at quarterback with these options. He would give it to Kamara when he should have kept it himself, or he would keep it himself when he should have gave it to Kamara. Those things are going to happen. Tony Jones Jr. also had 2 carries for 8 yards. Once again, everybody averages over 4 yards a carry. We end the game with 102 yards rushing, but we only ran the ball 20 times. And through 3 quarters, the score was 3-3. The running game should have been an emphasis, especially with the lackluster performance from the passing game. The receivers, in my opinion, did fine. There was separation from most of them, and there were a lot of receivers running open, especially in shorter routes. Winston insisted on going deep just about every time. Olave led the team, 5 catches, 80 yards. About 50 something of those yards came on one completion, which he fumbled after he caught it. Olave was targeted 13 times. 5 catches with 13 targets. There's your incompletions right there. That was Jameis Winston trying to make a big play out of everything. There were several plays where Mike Thomas or a tight end were open, very short, 3-step drop, throw it to him, let Thomas make a move, see what happens. No, no. Winston decided to go deep 13 damn times. Mike Thomas had 6 catches for 65 yards, including the only touchdown. He was targeted 9 times. Juwan Johnson was targeted 7 times. He finished with 4 catches for 40 yards. Jarvis Landry, who should have been involved more in the game, was only targeted 5 times. He had 4 catches for 40 yards. And I put the running backs here too because I wanted to show you that they were targeted 5 times and they caught 5 balls. There weren't a lot of yards to be had there, but at least there were completions, and at least somebody had a chance to make a play. We're going to get back to the disappointment of Winston in the offense in a minute. I'm going to talk about the defense now. The defense did exceptional. I got to say, with the situation we were put in, losing our best cornerback late in the game, being down our second best cornerback, we did okay. Not a lot of pressure from the defensive line. It's kind of strange. Through 2 games, the Saints have 1 sack total. But in this game, the stats credit Tom Brady with running the ball 3 times for a total of -2 yards. Now, Tom Brady doesn't run. I guess there's a there's a formula they use. If the quarterback tucks the ball and decides to try to run forward from his spot in the pocket, then they'll consider it a run. Everyone knows Tom Brady doesn't run, but he had 3 carries for -2 yards, which sounds to me like a sack or 2. But anyway, I digress. Our leading tackler was Shy Tuttle, and that's pretty awesome when your defensive lineman can be your leading tackle. 9 total tackles, including a half a sack. He also had a blocked pass at the line of scrimmage, a pass defense. The other half of that sack goes to Onyemata, who finished with 3 tackles. Pete Werner, once again, 8 tackles. Good job. Justin Evans was picked on a lot in this game. He finished with 7 tackles. He did okay. But he was picked on, as was Bradley Roby. Roby finished with 5 tackles. Werner also had a pass defense. Werner's doing great. Mario Davis had 6 tackles, including 1 pass defense. And Matthew had 3 tackles. Cameron Jordan had 3 tackles, including 1 for a loss. Caden Ellis had 3 tackles, including a pass defense. Granderson had 3 tackles, including a tackle for a loss. And Tano Passanio had 3 tackles. Okay, last week, Passanio was a healthy scratch, and we played Peyton Turner. This week, Peyton Turner was a healthy scratch, and we played Passanio. Passanio ends up with 3 tackles. Turner didn't have that many tackles last week, but he did have the blocked field goal. So altogether, I would say if our defense wouldn't have been put in a bad situation of having to go on the field after our offense has turned the ball over 5 times, I think our defense would have been the hero of the game. Let's talk about some individual performances here and my overall take on the game. The field position was the biggest problem. In a defensive struggle, when points are at a premium, field position becomes a must. Deontay Hardy had 2 kick returns. He let most of them go. If they're over your head, there's nothing you can do. But when he got his hands on the ball, he took off twice and he averaged over 30 yards on those two kick returns. But on his one punt return that he tried to take, he went backwards and lost 6 yards. So can't blame the special teams return unit for our lack of field position success. Blake Gillikin had 5 punts, two of them inside the 20. But there was one that he was kicking high and trying to pin him inside the 20, and it was fair caught right outside the 20. And I thought that was a poor punt. His average was 43, 44 yards. So you could have got some yards there if Blake could have done, as good of a job as he is capable of, but he did okay. The field position really, it fell in the hands of Buccaneers being able to move the ball just enough where when they did have to punt, it put us in a predicament and our offense couldn't get anything going. When you are Jameis Winston and you complete 25 passes but only for 236 yards, the way I do it is the number of completions, he had 25. You multiply that by 10 because that's the standard, 10 yards of completion. If you have 25 completions, you better have 25 yards. And if you're successful and you have 25 completions, you should have 300 plus passing yards. Dumping the ball off to the running backs, he only did it 5 times. There were so many incompletions that I feel like Winston should have taken the sure thing more often than not. And like I said, there were a lot of shallow routes he could have taken some shots on. He kept trying to go deep. And the offensive line has to protect very well in order for Winston to allow a play to develop where he can get the ball deep. And Winston was playing, obviously hurt. He was afraid to run. He didn't want to get hit. And I think our offensive line did a okay job, especially considering the competition. Our offensive line did fine. Winston had 3 to 4 seconds to throw the ball. He just wanted to wait for a longer route to develop, or he wasn't making his reads good enough. And this goes back to play calling. You determine man or zone by putting someone in motion. There weren't a lot of players in motion, and the motion is also a way to get fast linebackers to second guess things. When the wide receiver comes across the back of the formation, and you can determine whether it's man or zone by whether a defender's following. And you've got guys like Deontay Hardy and Chris Olave and Taysom Hill coming across the formation like that. It's prime time to hand the ball off once in a while. You do it. You get them thinking. Some sort of motion. We didn't see enough of that. As successful as the running game was, I don't feel like we called the running plays when we should have. I think as far as play calling goes, there was some inconsistency there. Jameis Winston was struggling, and we weren't slowing down that rush by doing enough fakes, enough play action. There wasn't enough, and there's nothing quick. There's nothing designed quick to get the ball out of Winston's hands fast. Everything is set up to develop, and the offensive line did fine, probably as good of a job as they're going to do. Winston was sacked 6 times. I haven't seen the film, but I'm sure half of that was his fault. If you're going to throw the ball 40 times and only run the ball 20 times, and the score is 3-3 when the fourth quarter begins, you're not doing a good job of play calling. The Bucs, on the other hand, threw the ball 34 times and they ran the ball 30 times. That's much more balanced. And their production was way worse. 30 carries for an average of 2.4 yards a carry. Buccaneers finished with 72 yards rushing on 30 carries. Now, that's dedication to the run. And, hey, you have success sometimes, you don't. But we threw the ball 40 times and ran it 20. The field position was the worst part. And the 5 turnovers was the main reason why the field position was so bad, and our lack of offense gaining enough yards. We couldn't make a first down. Neither could the Bucs for a while. I think they were 3 and out like 3 times in a row at one point. There in the second quarter when both teams were shut out. That fourth quarter was a nightmare. We gave up 17 points. We managed to score 7 late in the fourth quarter, but that's directly due to the turnovers. This big fight that happened. I heard some post game. A lot of them didn't seem to see Marshawn Lattimore uppercut Leonard Fournette. A lot of them thought because Fournette pushed first that it didn't matter what Lattimore did in retaliation. If Lattimore would have pushed Fournette back, maybe he doesn't get ejected. No, Lattimore gave Fournette an uppercut. That's what happened. And Mike Evans was going off the field. He wasn't coming off the bench. He was going off the field because they were going to punt or whatever. And he came running back on the field. Yes, Evans should have been ejected. But Lattimore deserved the ejection as well for hitting someone in the face, which is what he did. Now, Leonard Fournette should have been ejected because he started the whole goddamn thing. And he had his most productive runs after that happened when the turnover started and they had a short field. Fournette's longest carry was 13 yards. He barely finished with 30 yards, 20 something, 30 yards. Our defense was dominant. You can't get better than that. And Lattimore was probably the unsung player of the game until he did what he did last week as well. Late in the game, draws a personal foul. Now, I like our team being tough, but I also like them being smart. And some of these players are fucking thugs. When you uppercut someone, you're going to get kicked out of the game. You think you might want to be invested in the success of the team when you're playing the defending division champs, but you're in your home and it's 3-3, and the defense, you're the reason we're winning. That's not winning football. I'm tired of the fucking attitude. Yeah, you want to be tough. If someone hits you, you push back. You hit back. What the fuck are you doing swinging at somebody's head wearing a helmet? That's Mike Evans is a great player. He's a fucking problem child. Pardon my French. I cursed. You're going to have to forgive me for that one. But Mike Evans gets me going. And yeah, if Mike Evans does something, if Jameis Winston's in a Bucs uniform and he's pointing at Marshawn Lattimore's helmet, yeah, then Marshawn can push back. Then Mike Evans comes running out of nowhere and blindsides him, ear hole, whatever you want to call it. I'm tired of the attitude. I'm tired of stupid penalties, and we've been flagged a lot. But in this game, the refs were the cause for a lot of it. It wasn't just that we were turning the ball over, it was that the refs were giving the Bucs a chance time and time again for some petty stuff. The biggest one was the Bradley Roby personal foul, where they said he led with the helmet, but he was going to tackle the guy and Brait, the tight end, you can see it in the instant replay. He lowers his head and he strikes Roby's helmet with his helmet. That was the worst call. There were a bunch of them. The refs gave the Bucs some pretty crappy calls too. I usually don't complain about the refs as if it had something to do with the game, but when the game's this close, it had something to do with the game. So my biggest gripes are, of course, the turnovers and the way the play calling was. It wasn't cohesive. You run a receiver in motion and you don't fake off that motion, then you never give it to the receiver. And every time Hill comes in the game, he runs to the right. He runs to the left once and does good, but then against this aggressive defensive line and fast linebackers that the Bucs have, you have a play where he fakes to a receiver and then he drops back like he's going to set up the pass and then he goes to take off. That's way too much time wasted. Yes, you want motion, you want play action, but it's got to be quicker. It's got to be quicker. And Winston has never been a quick quarterback. When he decides to throw the ball within 3 seconds, he knows where he's going with the ball. Usually he's accurate enough and the ball is thrown hard enough where his receiver can make a play. Drop back to pass. 1, 2, 3, go. If Winston doesn't throw the ball in 3 seconds, he's waiting for something to develop. Then he gets happy feet. Several times he had 10 yards in front of him to run he didn't want to. And these deep shots that we were taking to Chris Olave is kind of new. You know, this is something they've been working on in practice. This is the reason we drafted Olave, a guy with speed. He's a better receiver than Hardy, is what we think, and we need a deep threat. And yeah, we're going to have to take our shots with Olave. But 5 or 6 of them with 13 total targets when it's not working. When I see Mike Thomas wide open, 5 yards in front of you, but you're going 60 yards down the field to someone you can't connect with, it drives me. And that's where the hot take comes in. Jameis Winston. When it's all said and done, the way things have turned out this offseason, I'm fine with Jameis Winston being our quarterback. Andy Dalton is a good backup. I think you let Jameis start. Jameis has the physical ability to make something happen, to do something with his arm or potentially with his feet that can move the ball, get us going, make a big play. Dalton is a game manager kind of deal, and Dalton's accuracy is slightly better than Winston, but it's, not elite stuff, but he knows Dalton knows where to go with the ball and he'll get rid of the ball quick. He'll make some bad decisions too. That pick six that Winston threw, very well. Dalton could have very well have thrown something just similar. But Winston was never this is the quarterback of the future in my mind. He was never that in my mind. Winston was a guy you want to take an opportunity with, give a chance to, and kind of like Ian Book. And after a couple of years, you see the writing on the wall and you move on. Well, Jameis Winston's got a lot of ability, and he's trying to put it all together. And I believe you give him a chance, you see what happens. One bad game where he turns the ball over 3 times, I'm not going to hold that against him. Ingram's fumbled twice now in 2 games. But what I hold against him is his inability to recognize he's got 10 yards in front of him, or his inability to recognize that he has a guy wide open in front of him and he's waiting for some big play to happen. He's got to get out of that mentality. It should get better with Alvin Kamara in the backfield. You can run more out of that position with Kamara. He can get the edge. He can fly through the defensive line. He can do all the runs. He can catch out of the backfield and make somebody miss. A lot of that's going to be better for Winston. Like I say, he targeted running backs 5 times in this game, 40 attempts, 5 of them to the running backs. 5 for 5, just not a lot of yards. 236 yards on 25 completions is ridiculous. And 50 of those yards came on that one pass to Olave, which means he had about 180 yards passing on 24 completions, 180 yards. It should be no less than 240 yards, 180 yards. At one point, I remember him having either 13 or 15 completions, and he only had 70 yards, 80 yards passing. I remember thinking this happened last week. We went into the game with negative passing yards in the first half last week, 20 total passing yards, some ridiculous number like that. It was much the same this week. At some point, he had like 15 completions, about 70 yards passing. That is just awful. So my hot take is Jameis Winston has the ability to be a fine quarterback but he's never going to be your franchise quarterback. We saw what happened. He was the quarterback for the Buccaneers forever. I never feared playing Jameis Winston. I never feared playing Cam Newton. Now, in our division at that time, I thought Jameis Winston was way better than Cam Newton. Because every now and then Winston, he doesn't have great accuracy, but it's accurate enough. He's got a really strong arm. It kind of reminds me of Teddy Bridgewater, where when Bridgewater's on and he's throwing the ball in 3 seconds after he drops back, those balls are pretty good. But Bridgewater doesn't have that killer instinct. Jameis, on the other hand, wants to hit that big play too much. And in a defensive game with a defensive head coach like we have now, this may become an issue with a play caller that needs to figure it out. So there you go. That's my take. Last week we score 17 points in the fourth quarter. This week we allow 17 points in the fourth quarter. We turn the ball over 5 times, and that's not winning football. In the end, we lose by 10 points. It could have been much worse. My attitude last week was blah. My attitude this week was uh-oh, because Winston needs to get his back issue figured out, and he needs to show a lot more than he did in this game. We also need Ingram back. Kamara back. We also need Kamara back. And we need to get rid of them damn turnovers. 2 fumbles, 3 interceptions, and all of those penalties. You're not going to beat many teams playing like that. You lucked out last week with Atlanta. Your luck ran out this week with the Bucs. That's what I got for the post game. I'm Joe. Subscribe to Rosenfield 10 for more videos like this. Let's hope we've got something to celebrate after this weekend as our beloved Saints are taking on the Carolina Panthers. Until then, who dat?